Welcome to the next video in the GaneshaDx tutorial series. This time we're going to look at animated textures. This one's a little bit complicated, and what we're going to do for this is I've set up a scene and we are going to create two types of animated textures. Let's jump right in. So this is the scene that we've done. If you watched the previous tutorial with the workflow, I know that it was pretty long. This is pretty much what we did. I went ahead and just threw in some wood paneling here and some roof paneling here and drew up a front of this building. Again, we're not going for artistic quality in these tutorials. That can be up to you. So what we're going to do in this tutorial here is we are going to animate this window so that this silhouette in the window moves back and forth and just wanders back and forth. And this one over here, we're going to have this open sign flash and blink and change colors throughout an animation. So how do we do this? First of all, if we go to texture, we'll go ahead and minimize this. If we look at this button here, we'll see that it says edit animations, but it's grayed out and we can't click it. So the first step that we need to do is go to map under map manage map resources, and for our state we need to make sure that there's a checkbox under palette animations and under texture animations. I'll go ahead and choose only palette animations for now. Oh, if you check palette animations, it automatically checks texture animations. So we'll go ahead and have both of these checked, and then we'll close. And now if we go back to our texture tab, we now have this button that says edit animations, and we click on that and we have a list of up to 32 animations that we can do. So there are two types of texture animations that we can do. The first is called UV animation, and the next is called palette animation. The palette animations are easy to wrap your head around, so we're going to start with that. So if we go here to edit, after just changing this to palette animation, this drop down, now you can have up to 32 animations and each one is its own drop down. We'll go ahead and click edit. And what we'll see here is that we have a new palette for this. Now, if I change this palette to red, or this entry to red, and return, and create a palette animation on another entry here and hit edit, you'll see that this is still red. So no matter which palette animation you edit, we have the same set of 16 palettes for every palette animation for your map. I'm going to hit none on that and go back to editing our first one. So the idea is that the same way that we applied a palette to one of our polygons here, so let's go to texture, let's return back to this main screen. You'll see that we have our texture palette 3, and I'll just, let me turn off highlight. As I cycle through these palettes, you'll see that different palettes are being applied to this polygon, which is something that we've already covered. And we understand how that works by it's a search and replace. If we go and look here, if we load our default palette, it'll replace all of the colors that match this palette, all of the pixels that match this palette color will be mapped to the first entry, and so on. So all the ones that match this will be replaced with this color. All the ones that match the third one will be replaced with the third one. The same thing happens with palette animations. So let's go to our edit animations, and we'll edit this. And so what's happening is that we have 16 new palettes. The default setup looks like our default animation, the one that we looked at, or default palette, the one that we looked at in the previous tutorial, except that each entry down is being shifted one to the left. That's why it has this kind of diagonal look. So this all white is at the 16th position, then the 15th, and then the 14th, and so on. And then it wraps around. So let's grab this color and put it back here so that we have this. Now, each of these properties controls your palette animation. So target palette ID, that would be on our palette list this. And what happens is a palette animation will overwrite one of your set palettes completely. And just so that we can see what's happening, we see that this wood texture is set to palette ID 3. So if we go back into our edit animations and we edit this and we say that our target palette ID for this animation is going to be 3, you'll see that we're starting to get some blinkies. Our start index is going to be the first index of this palette, the first palette to start with, and then our total frames is the total number of frames that animation will take place over. So in this case, we have a start index of 0 and a total frames of 2, so it'll be 0 and 1. That's 2 total frames. We can increase this all the way up to 16 because we're starting at index 0. And now you'll see that as this animation plays, that each of these colors, if you watch one single pixel, that it gets darker with or lighter with each step of the animation. Each step of the animation is controlled by frame duration. The lower this number, the faster the animation will play. So look at that, it's going real fast. And the higher the number, the slower the animation will play. What this means is this is how many frames, 60 frames per second, how many frames will pass before going to the next palette, before replacing the existing palette with the next palette in the list. So let's set this down to, say, 6. And we'll set this to 60, meaning there will be a full second between frames. And if you watch each second, each of these pixels gets lighter as it cycles through this animation. And that is because it's overwriting palette 3, texture palette 3, we're overwriting palette 3. Okay, I think I repeated myself a bit there, so hopefully this makes sense. Let's go ahead and look at our palette list. And we're not using palette 7, so our new animation we're going to set to palette 7. So go to Edit Animations, go here, and say our target is going to be palette ID 7. So now what do we do for our actual animations? Well, first of all, we want to change all of these. Let's turn our highlight back on so we see all 4 of them. We're going to set these to texture palette 7. And a pretty good starting spot would be, first of all, you can see that the animation is playing. We're going to go here and we're going to export out our palette 6. We're going to export this out and we're going to call this, we're just going to call this animated palette frame 1. I sure hope that I am spelling palette correctly. Okay, so we'll hit OK. And now if we load that up in here, animated palette for frame 1, we see these are the colors for our frame 1. We are also going to go in here and go to our Edit Animations, and we're going to import that as our first frame here. So click the Import button. We'll go up a directory and down a directory to refresh this and load that up. So now frame 0 is going to be the colored one that we expect, right? So you saw it there for a second. And we are going to start with just 2 total frames, and you can see it toggling between these 2 palettes. We have the one with the green color here and that. So I'm going to go ahead and import our animated frame palette 1 again, and the animation disappears because we're doing this frame, or this palette, and then this palette every 60 seconds. So I'm going to just change this to a red. And now you can see exactly how this palette animation works. We want to have kind of a nice gradual one, so I'm going to import this over multiple frames. And of course we're only changing this one color. And so let's start with this green, and then let's make it a little bit lighter of a green, or actually a little bit darker of a green. Okay, and then you can just Control A and Control C this field here to paste it into here. Normal workflow, you would probably want to be creating these palettes in Sprite or your other image editor. So we'll just grab this and move it down. And each time we're going to make it a little bit darker. And one last one. Boom. Okay, so our total frames here says 2. We want a total frames of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So increase this to 5. And now you'll see that our open sign is dimming as it goes. Let's lower this down to 10. And you can see how our animation is playing on this open sign. We can also do this to other colors. So let's say we have this and we want to add just a bit of green to it. So let's go over here. I think that's the first color. Let's load up our default palette here and figure out which color this is. This is our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th color in the palette. So it looks like that one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it does. It's that one. We'll go ahead and just grab this and paste it right here. And we will paste it into all of these fields. And just as a start, okay, so we can see how it's kind of a green background there, and then as it goes brighter, maybe that background gets more illuminated by the neon color of the light. See, I know that's not very convincing from an artistic point of view, but hopefully that this has made sense to you. Just as a quick recap, target palette ID is which palette ID to override. The start index says where our animation starts, and our total frames is how many animations that frame is. And then our frame duration is how long each frame of that animation lasts in 1/60th of a second. Okay. If we were to create a second animation, if we wanted to create a second palette animation, we can do so simply by changing this to palette animation and say we will set a target ID of 6 and or not a total frames of 6, target palette ID of 6, which will be kind of the rest of this, right? And you can see that our silhouette is starting to flash. We can start our index at 5 and tell it to go. Let's increase this quite a bit so that we don't have such a uncomfortable thing to look at. In this case, our start index is now 5, and it goes for 2 total frames, so it's just blinking between 5 and 6. It's flipping between these two, and we can prove this simply by, let's see, setting that to red and setting this to green. So you can see that this red is blinking between red and green. Maybe as a different color so it's not confusing with this, but you can see that it's changing between red and blue. So we are doing these 2 frames on target palette ID, which is the palette ID that these polygons are set to. And so you can have as many palette animations that you want in your thing, but remember you can only have 16 total palettes for those animations, and you can't really skip over any. You choose a start index and then how many frames. So you could have, say, 8 palette animations that are 2 frames each, or you can have 2 that are up to 8 frames each, and so on. Either way, you have only a total of 16 to deal with. We're going to go ahead and just delete this palette animation by just changing this drop down to none, and that animation will stop. Pretty nice, right? Now, for this guy, we're going to do a UV animation. So let's go ahead and open that up and hit edit. UV animations, we'll want to look at our UV palette, and we'll come back to this section at the top in a moment. The first that we want to look at is the canvas properties. Okay, so canvas properties, the way it works is like this. Let's see if I can explain this very well in Sprite. You will define a canvas and say that this is our canvas, okay? And then you will define the first frame of your texture animation. So let's say it's this. We'll fill it in with this. What happens, and let's actually do a second frame of animation. We'll put it over here, and we will color it another color. So this darker one here, this is going to be our canvas. And what happens is that you assign a first frame, you assign a canvas, you assign a first frame, then you assign a total number of frames. And what will happen is it'll start at the region defined by the first frame, and then play all of the subsequent frames after that. And what it basically does is it takes the pixel data that's inside this first frame and places it into the canvas just like this. It places it right into the canvas. And then on the next frame, it'll grab this and place this right into the canvas, and so on and so forth. And this canvas, it doesn't matter what graphics you have here. You can have a little smiley face. Nobody in game will ever see this smiley face because this canvas region will be overridden by the frames applied to that canvas. So that's a general theory that we need to know here. Let's see that applied. So first of all, let's set our canvas properties. So we see that we have a texture page, which is just like on our polygons. As we cycle through our texture pages, you can see the first one has our initial checkerboard. The second one has all that grass that we did in the previous tutorial. This one shows the front of the building, and I know this is kind of hard to see, but this is the wood paneling here, and then this is the roof shingles, and then palette 3 shows the fence that we did. Or texture page 3 shows the fence that we did. So we're going to do it on texture page 3 just so we have enough room to work with. You'll be putting it wherever it fits, basically. Now, then you have two properties, the position X and the position Y. Position X can be any number as long as it fits on the canvas or on the texture page. However, position X is only settable in increments of 4. Meaning it can start at 0, 4, 8, 12, 16, and so on. If you try to punch in something like 13, it's going to snap to the closest increment of 4. That's a limitation of Final Fantasy Tactics engines. Now the same is true for size X and size Y. You can have your size Y be as much as you want or as little as you want, and your size X is in increments of 4. You have 32, 36, 40, 44, and so on. You can see that as we increase this, it's going in those chunks of 4. So that's our canvas. So we'll set up our canvas, and then we have our first frame property. So let's go ahead and set this to texture page 3, and you can see that we have now 2 green squares on this up here. This may be a little bit hard to see. Let me see if I can maximize it for you. We have 2 green rectangles that indicate the frames, and we also have its position and both on X and Y, but we have 2 other frames here, or 2 other properties, total frames and frame duration. We'll get to that in a second. One thing to note is that while the canvas has a size X and a size Y, our frame does not. This is the properties for the first frame, so I'm going to set this total frames to 1, and you can see that we only have 1 total frame. Let's position this down. Whoops, that's the canvas. Let's position this down. And as you see, as I'm moving this around, you can see that the pixels inside of the canvas are updating. Right here. So you can see that the pixels here are updating, and they're updating to match what's in there. So if I move this position Y all the way up, you can see exactly this part of the texture is being replaced into the canvas. We're going to go ahead and just move it over in front of it. And this is a best practice. You can put your frames and your canvas wherever you want. They can even be on different texture pages. I prefer to keep them like this. It keeps your texture a little bit tidy. So we don't have any animation going on here yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my image, and just down here I'm going to draw just a big old number 1 and then a 2, and these look like they're about distanced apart. We'll see when we get in there. Let's reload our texture with Control R. We're going to move our canvas up, not too far up. We're going to move it there. Then we're going to move our first frame up right here to right there. We're also going to reduce our size, and we'll move our position of our first frame to the left. It looks like I did not quite aim this very well because if we add extra frames, so you can see that we're getting an animation in there. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can eyeball this a little bit closer. Hit save, reload. There we go. You can see they're not quite centered. That's fine, right? Let's go back up to here. Well, let's talk about total frames. Total frames is exactly what it sounds like. These properties, the position X and Y and texture page, this defines where the first frame of your animation is going to go, and total frames is how many animations total you'll have, or how many frames you'll have total in that animation. You can see as I increase this number, we get more. Now what happens sometimes is if I add another one, this next frame is going to go right off the texture page. But Final Fantasy Tactics Engine and Ganesha support wrapping around to the other side. You'll see that it's not quite lined up, and that's because when it wraps to the other side, the next one will start with an index of 8. Its X position will be 8. We almost never see textures out in this border. And so it'll start here. And as we increase our total frames, we'll see that it just keeps doing that. Now, it will go off the edge. This just happens to be mathematically set to where if we go over here, that this just happens to collect this last pixel on the page. Normally, the math just worked out that way. I would still recommend against setting it up like that. Like I'd probably change my size just a little bit more or a little bit less. You'd have to toy around with it. Generally, though, you're not going to have an animation that has this many frames because look at how much texture space this takes up. Plus, you would have to actually animate all of these frames, and that's not a lot of fun either, is it? So let's reduce this back down to 3. And let's go ahead and make our size a little bit wider again. So we have this animation. Now, how do we get this animation, though, into our scene? Well, it's actually pretty easy. Let's just take this guinea pig polygon right here, go back to our main texture properties. We know that we want to be on texture page 3, and all we do is align these UVs up with that canvas. Because as you can see that our texture here is actually updating. Let's change this to maybe a palette that, there we go, that's a little bit easier to see, right? So our UVs now map right on top of that canvas. And that's that canvas itself is being updated with the pixel data from these 3 frames. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's take a look at what we want to do with this, because this is a little bit more advanced, not super advanced, but a little bit more. So let's go ahead and delete our 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to grab the pixels that make this up. Now, let's take a look at where our UVs actually are. It looks like it starts, what is that, about 2 pixels to the left here. We can do a little bit of testing just to say, okay, is it there? Okay, yes, this is right inside of our UV, and it looks like it's 2 pixels above the frame, so we can put a little pixel there and save. Yeah, see, we missed. Okay, so this is a quick way of doing it if you didn't want to bring on your overlay like this. So let's go ahead and grab all of these pixels that are underneath of this UV. We're just going to grab them and move them down here. Okay. And we'll give it a little bit of the buffer like we normally do. And we're going to hit save. Let's go ahead and remove this and this. Hit save. Reload. Oops, look at this. We forgot to turn off our UV map. And so we can see the UV map painted on the textures. Okay, so now that we have these four polygons, these 4 UV maps mapped to this window, we're going to just move this up to texture page 3, and then we're going to move and position it right over these pixels. Okay? We still have this animation going. I'm going to just turn off that animation for now. This is also not ideal. Let's go ahead and where is it at? So move this back down into place. Okay, we just use that as a sample. So now we have these 4 polygons are mapped to this part of the image. Now you'll see that in our image we still have this up here. We don't have anything mapped to these polygons anymore. If I look at this, there's no UVs on this part of the image anymore. I mean, it's just not being used. But these are going to sit on where our canvas sits on. So let's do a little bit of math here and figure out how big this actual space is. Okay. So we start at 9 is the U for the red, and the U for the green here is 65. So we'll just take 65 minus 9, and that's 56. Is that divisible by 4? I don't know. I don't think it is. It is. It's divisible by 4. Perfect. So we know that it has to be 56 wide. Now let's look at the green axis here, which starts at 39 on the V. And the Y here ends at 75. So we'll say 75 minus 39, and our height is 36. I'll pin these to the top, which is a little app I have for my Windows that allows me to do Control plus space, and it'll pin whatever I want to the top. Very useful. I would recommend Googling it if you run into this kind of situation a lot. So this is what we want. We want a space that is 56 wide and 36 high. So let's go in here to our Edit Animations, create a UV animation, edit it. We are going to say texture page 3, and we are going to just position our Y so that it looks like it covers it, and looks like we have to move all of this over to the left one because everything has to start at 8 pixels. So now we'll save this and reload. And we know that our width is 56, so we'll say size X is 56. And our height is 36, so we'll just bring this down to 36. And see how it covers that space entirely? Perfect, right? Let's go ahead and move our frames right into place. And so we will move these over there and move them down so that it's just nice and perfectly aligned. You'll see that our animation is no longer happening. We are getting a little bit of an animation, which is, let's just clean this up. These pixels should be the checkerboard pixels. Okay, so now you can see that nothing's happening in here because these two, the pixels inside these two frames just coincidentally happen to be identical. Now we will grab this and we will paste it right here, and we'll save. And now look, we're getting a blinking effect. If we grab this one more time and paste it over here, and then grab the silhouette of our person, let's cut him out of this scene and move him over 2 pixels. And then we are going to fill this in with our paint bucket and save it. And reload. And now you can see that our guy is starting to move. And if we look, we can close these calculators now. If we look, we can see that our guy here is starting to move. That's pretty exciting. One thing you'll notice is that in the texture preview, it's showing us the default palette. And that is because here we have some properties. We can change this preview palette because it doesn't know the animated texture doesn't have a palette associated with it. The polygon does. And whatever polygon you attach to this is going to have that palette. It doesn't care. The animation doesn't care about it at all. So let's cycle through this till we find the one that we're looking for, which happens to be this. And this is, again, entirely preview. If I change it, you'll see that the window isn't changing. Okay. Looks like we lost some pixels. Let's go ahead and just add those in real quick. Oops, we don't even need it there. And save. There we go. Okay, we just made that little fix because it was going to bother me. Now, if you look at our thing here, this is not actually one of the frames. So what we're going to do is we're just going to select all of this, right? And we're going to fill it with this. And then, just to be smart, Alec, we are going to say, wow, my mouse is okay. Hi. And we're going to do a little smiley face here. And let's just type in the word canvas. And hit save. And when we look at this, you'll see that we didn't get any of those pixels in there, right? There's no pixels in there. Because it's overwriting those pixels. Completely overwriting them with the content from the frames. So just keep that in mind. Canvas is nothingness. Let's go ahead and grab another frame of this. And we said it was 36 or 56 wide, so there we go. We'll grab that and paste it right here. And what we're going to do is cut him out, move him over to, and paste in. And when we reload, we have another frame here. We can increase our total frames. And now he's moving a little bit further. Let's go ahead and add another one. Okay, I'll go ahead and just add a few more frames here. At this point, I think you probably get it. I'm really just kind of having a little bit of fun. So we'll select all of these, cut them out, 1, 2. Then we will go back to our magic wand and unselect that one. How do we do that? Well, I don't know. 1, 2, and now we will select only that, 1, 2, and we will fill in these transparent pixels, save it, reload it, add a couple frames to our animation, and look at that. Look at him going back and forth. So he's going in one direction, and then he's stopping and returning to the beginning, which is where we now cover animation mode. Frame duration works just like the palette animation. If we reduce this, this is going to make him go faster, and if we increase it, it makes him move over slower. I think 10 was a nice spot for it. Let's go ahead and save this for now. And so you'll see that he's moving to the right and then snapping back to the left. We have animation mode, and there are 4 options that you can do. There's 2 of them. We can just disable this, and look at how we get the high canvas image here. It no longer plays the animation. If you need to disable an animation just for whatever sake, you can. Like say during your testing, you don't want to actually delete this information, but you want the animation to stop playing it, just hit disabled. And unknown, we don't know what this does. We found that in some of the maps, this field is set to an unknown property. And so far, all of that was like debug content. In some maps, there's parts of the textures that aren't used in the production map, and they had unknown set. We don't know what it is. I would just stay away from using that. It probably works the same as disabled. We don't know. But the important ones are forward looping, forward and reverse looping, forward once on trigger, and reverse once on trigger. So this is the default one, is forward on looping. Then we have forward and reverse looping. So if you click it, it'll play the animation in order, and then when it gets to the end, it will play backwards, and when it gets to the beginning, it'll play forwards again indefinitely. You can see him scooting back and forth in the window. The next 2 are forward once on trigger and reverse once on trigger. If you choose this, you won't see an animation play at all. You'll see the canvas animation, and in-game, actually, you probably will see the first frame of the animation. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think you will, actually. I think that this is what you'll see, is what's underneath the canvas. But what this means, forward and reverse once on trigger, is that there is a scripting language in Final Fantasy Tactics, which is outside of the scope of Ganesha. Ganesha doesn't have any support for scripting. But there are other tools that you can use to write your own events. So if you remember in the game, there's like the scene where they summon Cloud in, and there's all these special effects, and the characters are walking around the scene talking to each other. Cloud spawns in. All of those are event script commands for that cutscene. One of the commands for writing cutscenes is a command that activates an animated texture. And you'll notice this if we save this. Let's go ahead and save this. Let's collapse this down, and let's go to one of those maps. We're going to open map 003, and we can see these doors here. There's a cutscene in which a character walks through this door, and then the door closes, and it's entirely done on a texture. And if we look at our animations, we can see that we have several UV animations. Let's see if this is the right one. This looks like it. And if we change this from forward once on trigger to forward looping, you'll see that it opens the door. Because it's a little hard to see because of the colors here, but our frame is this one here, and then our canvas is right here surrounded in red. The second one is here surrounded in green for the first frame. And if we increase the total frames and increase this duration, You can see that the door is opening and closing as it goes through this open frame and a closed frame. This preview palette, here we go, this is a preview palette. So this is what we see, and you can see that this is updating. So this door opens, or appears to open because it's in a UV animation. It appears to open, a character walks in during a cutscene. That's what forward once on trigger and reverse once on trigger. If you choose reverse once on trigger, there is a map, I believe actually that it's map 001. Yes, it's this one. There are two animations. Let me press Z to center. There are two animations for this. The first animation will open the gate and the other animation will close the gate. And it's actually using the exact same information. Let's see if this is it. I don't think that's it. Who knows which one? It looks like this is it. There's one animation that will just say forward looping. Okay, it's not those ones. It's the ones on the back. Okay, so you can see that we have this this animation of this gate opening up. So this is set to forward once on trigger, and when the cutscene says, it'll play up. The other one is if we say reverse on trigger, then it'll start at the top and then play down. And so it uses the exact same UV animation, but it'll play it in forward or reverse, depending on the event script that you play. But for, most of our map making stuff, unless you're getting into full-on modding stuff, you don't have to worry about that too much. Just know that if you want to control your animations through script, you choose one of these two on triggers. So let's go ahead and go back and open up our workflow tutorial map. And let's go to our texture and change this UV animation back to forward looping. And the last thing that, we'll change our preview palette back to this. The last thing that I want to do before we wrap this up is that I want to actually look at this in game. So we want to just see it working in game, right? So I'll run my little batch command. Again, we will talk about writing these batch commands and making it easy for you to test your content in game in another tutorial. Probably the last one. It feels like a good last tutorial content stuff. And we'll load up our map, and we will see exactly what I was talking about. Did we just say forward looping? We probably wanted this to be forward and reverse looping because it looks nicer. But here we go. We can see that, you can hear me tapping those buttons to get through that dialogue, right? We can see that we have our open sign doing its palette animation and our silhouette walking back and forth in the window. And it's, I know that this video came out pretty long. I know I keep apologizing for long videos, but there you go. That's how to do animated textures. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next tutorial.